I was invited to my sister's engagement party, but when I showed up, my uncle whispered, "She only invited you out of pity." There was no name card, no seat. No one even said hello. I turned around and left. The next morning, my sister was at my door saying, "You didn't have to make a scene." Her face went pale when she saw this. I, 32M, never expected my own sister's engagement party to become the catalyst for what would happen next. The cream-colored invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, elegant script announcing her upcoming celebration. I'd been looking forward to it, despite our complicated relationship over the years. Walking into the upscale venue that evening, I immediately noticed something was off. The reception area buzzed with familiar faces from our extended family, but no one made eye contact. I approached the guest registry table, scanning for my name card among the neat rows. Nothing. I checked twice, then asked the coordinator if there had been a mistake. She looked at me with confusion and suggested I speak with the family directly. That's when my uncle appeared beside me, his breath heavy with whiskey. He leaned in close and whispered that my sister had only invited me out of pity, that everyone knew I didn't really belong there. The words hit like a physical blow. I looked around the room again, this time with different eyes. The circular tables were perfectly arranged, each place setting accounted for. There was genuinely no seat for me. Family members who had seen me arrive continued their conversations without acknowledgement. My own cousins turned away when I approached. The humiliation burned through me as I stood there, realizing I was essentially a charity case at my own sister's celebration. Without saying another word to anyone, I turned and walked out. The drive home was a blur of anger and hurt. The next morning, she appeared at my door before I'd even finished my coffee. Her face was flushed, and she immediately launched into how I'd embarrassed her by leaving so abruptly. She said I hadn't needed to make such a scene, that people were asking questions about my dramatic exit. I let her finish her rant before I moved aside, revealing what I'd been working on all night. My laptop sat open on the kitchen table, displaying a detailed family tree I'd been researching for months. But this wasn't just any genealogy project. Her face went completely pale when she saw what was on the screen. 6 months earlier, I'd started digging into our family history out of curiosity. What I discovered was far more explosive than I'd ever imagined. Our grandfather, the man our entire family revered as a war hero and successful businessman, had built his fortune on lies. The documents I'd uncovered showed he'd stolen the identity of a deceased soldier and used those credentials to secure government contracts after the war. The family business, the foundation of our generational wealth, was built on fraud. More damaging still, I'd found evidence that our father knew about it and had helped cover it up for decades. But the real bombshell was what I'd discovered about my sister specifically. The trust fund she'd been living off, the one that paid for her expensive lifestyle and upcoming wedding, was directly tied to money that should have gone to the actual veterans' surviving family. I'd already made contact with them. My sister's voice was barely a whisper when she asked what I wanted. I told her it was simple. I wanted the respect and treatment I deserved as a family member, where everyone would learn the truth about where our money really came from. She tried to argue that I was being unreasonable, that one bad night shouldn't destroy decades of family history. I reminded her that she'd made it clear I was only kept around out of pity, so perhaps it was time to find out how much that pity was really worth. The next few days were interesting. My phone started ringing constantly. First my parents, then various aunts and uncles, all suddenly very concerned about my well-being. They wanted to know if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I'd like to come over for dinner. My sister called repeatedly, her tone shifting from angry to pleading. She said she'd been stressed about the wedding and hadn't meant what happened at the party. She claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that of course I was welcome at family events. I listened to each call, but didn't commit to anything. Instead, I continued my research, uncovering more details about the fraud. I found records of the real veteran's family struggling financially, while our grandfather lived comfortably off stolen valor. 2 weeks later, I received a formal invitation to a family dinner at my parents' house. Not just any dinner. They were planning to announce my sister's engagement officially and wanted the whole family there. The invitation was hand-delivered, with a personal note from my sister apologizing for the confusion at her party. I arrived to find my place at the table not only set but positioned prominently next to my parents. Everyone was overly friendly, asking about my work, my interests, my thoughts on various topics. The contrast to the engagement party was stark. During dinner, my father stood to make a toast about family values and sticking together through thick and thin. He specifically mentioned how proud he was of all his children and how family bonds were unbreakable. My sister watched me nervously throughout the speech. After the meal, she cornered me in the kitchen and asked directly what it would take to make things right. I told her I'd been thinking about it, and what I really wanted was for the family to do the right thing. She assumed I meant accepting me back into the fold. Instead, I explained that I thought we should establish a scholarship fund for veterans' families, funded by a portion of the trust money. She went pale again, realizing I wasn't just going to quietly accept their newfound kindness. The following month brought a series of family meetings. My parents, my sister, and several relatives gathered regularly to discuss family matters. I was suddenly included in every conversation, my opinion sought on everything from investment decisions to vacation planning. But I could see the strain in their forced smiles. They knew I held information that could destroy not just our family's reputation, but potentially result in serious legal consequences. The statute of limitations on fraud might have passed, but the public relations disaster would be permanent. My sister's wedding planning became increasingly frantic. She'd postponed the original date, claiming she wanted a more intimate ceremony. In reality, I knew she was terrified I might choose that moment to reveal what I'd learned. 3 months after the engagement party incident, I made my decision. I contacted the local newspaper and arranged a meeting with an investigative journalist. I didn't want to destroy my family out of spite, but I also couldn't continue pretending everything was normal. The article ran on a Sunday morning. It detailed the stolen identity, the fraudulent contracts, and the ongoing impact on the real veteran's family. I'd provided enough documentation to make the story credible, but I'd also made sure to emphasize the human cost rather than just the financial crimes. My phone exploded with calls within hours. My sister was hysterical, my parents were furious, and various relatives were demanding explanations. I turned off my phone and went for a long walk. When I returned that evening, I found my sister sitting on my porch steps. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. She asked why I'd done it, why I couldn't have just accepted their apologies and moved on. I sat down beside her and explained that respect earned through fear wasn't real respect. The way they'd treated me at her engagement party was just a symptom of a deeper problem. Our family's willingness to ignore inconvenient truths and exclude anyone who might threaten their comfortable lives. She wanted to know what happened next. I told her that the veteran's family had been contacted and that I'd already started the process of establishing the scholarship fund I'd mentioned. The trust money would be used to help other veterans' families, which felt like the right way to honor the man our grandfather had stolen from. The wedding was quietly canceled 2 weeks later. My sister's fiancé's family had seen the news coverage and decided they couldn't proceed with the union. I actually felt bad for him. He'd seemed like a decent person who'd gotten caught up in circumstances beyond his control. Update 1. 6 months later, our family dynamics had settled into a new normal. The scholarship fund was established and had already helped a dozen families. My parents had aged visibly from the stress, but they'd also started attending therapy to deal with the generational trauma of keeping such a significant secret. My sister eventually found work at a nonprofit organization. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that she was now helping veterans' families, though she seemed to genuinely care about the work. She'd also started paying her own way for the first time in her adult life. Our relationship remained strained, but was slowly improving. She'd admitted that the engagement party had been deliberately planned to exclude me, that she'd been embarrassed by what she saw as my average lifestyle compared to her trust fund existence. The humiliation had been intentional. We met for coffee occasionally, carefully navigating conversations about family and the future. She was dating someone new, a social worker who knew about our family's history and didn't seem to care about the missing trust fund. The most surprising development was how the extended family had reacted. Rather than closing ranks and shutting me out permanently, many of them had expressed relief that the secret was finally out. Several cousins reached out to thank me for having the courage to do what they'd never been able to do. My uncle, the one who'd whispered those cruel words at the engagement party, had struggled the most with the revelation. He'd been one of the few family members who genuinely believed in our grandfather's war hero status. Learning the truth had shaken his entire worldview. The legal consequences had been minimal due to the passage of time, but the social impact was significant. My parents had resigned from several charitable boards, and the family business had undergone a complete restructuring to distance itself from its fraudulent origins. Update 2. A year after the newspaper article, I received an unexpected letter. It was from the daughter of the veteran whose identity had been stolen. She'd read the story and wanted to thank me for bringing the truth to light. She explained that her family had always wondered why their father's military benefits had been so complicated to access after his death. They'd assumed it was typical government bureaucracy, never imagining that someone had been impersonating him for decades. The letter included a photograph of her father in his military uniform, along with some of his actual service records. She said she'd like to meet if I was willing, to share stories about the man our grandfather had pretended to be. I arranged to meet her at a small cafe downtown. She was probably in her 70s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. She brought more photographs and some of her father's letters home from the war. Reading them, I realized how completely my grandfather had fabricated his supposed military experience. She wasn't angry about the fraud. She said she was just grateful that the truth had finally come out. Her father had been a genuinely heroic person, and she was glad his real story could finally be told alongside the correction of our family's lies. We talked for hours about the impact of family secrets and the importance of honesty across generations. She mentioned that the scholarship fund had helped her own grandson attend college, which created an unexpected connection between our families. Before leaving, she gave me one of her father's service medals. She said she wanted someone in our family to remember the real man, not the fabricated version our grandfather had created. I was deeply moved by the gesture. Update 3. 2 years after that engagement party, my sister announced her engagement to the social worker she'd been dating. This time, the celebration was small and genuine. She personally called to invite me and made sure to mention that my seat would be right next to hers at the head table. The wedding was beautiful in its simplicity. Instead of an expensive venue, they chose a community center where her fiancé's nonprofit held events. Rather than elaborate flowers, they used potted plants that guests could take home. The whole ceremony reflected their shared values about community and service. During her speech, my sister publicly acknowledged the changes our family had gone through and specifically thanked me for having the courage to tell the truth. She said it had been painful but necessary, and that she was grateful to be building her new marriage on a foundation of honesty. I realized that what had started as a moment of humiliation at an engagement party had ultimately led to something much more valuable than the superficial family acceptance I'd once craved. We'd all been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our history. The veteran's daughter attended the wedding as my guest. She and my sister had become friends through their shared involvement with the scholarship fund. Seeing them laugh together over dinner felt like a kind of healing I hadn't expected. My parents seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. The burden of keeping such a significant secret had apparently been weighing on them more than they'd ever admitted. They'd started volunteering with veteran organizations and seemed to find purpose in making amends for their father's actions. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd simply accepted that humiliating treatment at the engagement party and moved on. Would our family have continued living with that fundamental dishonesty? Would my sister have built her marriage on money that wasn't rightfully ours? Instead, that moment of cruelty became the catalyst for something much more meaningful. We'd all learned that real family bonds are built on respect and honesty, not on shared secrets and financial dependency. The trust fund money was gone, but what we'd gained was much more valuable. As I watched my sister dance with her new husband, I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to let them continue living a lie. The truth had been painful, but it had also set us free.